South Carolina and Ole Miss set to do battle at Williams-Brice Stadium in what I would call one of the most underrated bad blood games of the 2024 season. We are here previewing, predicting, and breaking down this matchup between the Gamecocks and the Rebels. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Phillips. He's Cole Thompson. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get those. You can also find us across all social media platforms, as well as our website, SECUnfiltered.com. This segment brought to you by our friends over at GameTime. Download the GameTime app and use promo code SECU for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's promo code SECU at checkout to get $20 off today. Gamecocks and Rebels set to do battle at Williams-Brice Stadium. We are here previewing, predicting, and breaking down this matchup. I am Chris Phillips, and helping me do so is my good friend Cole Thompson. Cole, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time and excited to break down this one with you.
I think you had to throw me on this game. I think that everyone knew that watches this channel was excited to know that I was going to be talking about this game, because I am one of the very few people who have been praising South Carolina's name all offseason. I believe that this team is better than advertised. And I'm also somebody who is very well known for kind of being the banter and the bandwagon leader of Dartnado. And that is not looking pretty good right now. So this is a game that has massive playoff implications for one side, massive, I would even say, playoff implications for another side. And more importantly, you have a well-rested team that gets a second shot at getting a marquee win in, for my money, the most underrated atmosphere in all of college football. And Shane Beamer, death, taxes, and having his team prepared for these type of matchups can be expected. And well be assured, this is going to really be determined by how Ole Miss responds after what had to have been one of the most ugliest, dreadful, daunting, horrific, maggot-filled, disgustingly pathetic excuse, poorly coached, dismayful play calling, absolute atrocious performance of a game that was their homecoming. By the way, homecoming queen went home in tears because she did not see her Rebels get a win.
Cole, this is a game that already was going to be really, really interesting. Before the season, I think when you look at the slate, I think it was probably one of the most underrated games of the season. When you look at the 2024 slate, again, like I mentioned, the premier matchups, it got even more interesting after Ole Miss's loss to Kentucky just a few days ago. And again, we'll break that down more in detail, but really excited for this one. A 3:30 p.m. Eastern time kickoff on ESPN. Of course, Cole, like you mentioned, at Williams-Brice Stadium. And we all saw the noon kickoff atmosphere for the LSU game. You know it is going to be a raucous environment, one of the best you'll probably see in the SEC this season. Cole, Ole Miss in this game is a 9.5-point favorite. The over-under set at 53 points. Ole Miss leads the all-time series 9-8. So these two teams haven't met a ton, but there have been some memorable matchups, including the last time they met, Cole, 2020. Ole Miss won that game 59-42. That was actually the final game of Will Muschamp's tenure in Columbia, South Carolina. Those of might recall or remember, that was the clipboard game, which Lane Kiffin tossed his clipboard in the air when they hit a wide touchdown pass. So again, there's been some very memorable matchups. You go all the way back, Cole, to 2008, the birth of Sandstorm Fuel on that Thursday night. Yours truly, 2009 that was. Let me correct myself. 08, they were at Ole Miss. 09, the birth of Sandstorm. I was actually at that game at Williams-Brice Stadium. One of the most memorable nights, I'd probably say, in Gamecocks football history. So it has been a really, really fun series when the two teams have met up. And Cole, as we dive into the nitty-gritty with this game and really talk about the matchup, I think you've got to start, Cole, with the Rebels. Because, again, this was one, as we looked at Ole Miss's schedule coming in the year, right? You knew, hey, this is a team that plays a preseason, essentially. Like, we praised Ole Miss. We gave them their credit for the first 4 games, deservingly so. It's one thing to beat your opponents. It's one thing to handle lesser competition. It's another to win the way they were winning. Let's just put it out there, right? The statistics and what they were doing. But then you get into SEC play. And a couple weeks ago, Cole, many of us thought, the Kentucky game's really not going to be a test. They won't get their first real test until Death Valley, Baton Rouge, which will be upcoming next week. And they won't get their first test until they take on LSU. Well, now you're 0-1 in SEC play. And you can't afford to fall to 0-2, Cole. I mean, this game already was a game that Ole Miss, needed to win. Obviously, every SEC game is important. But does it not feel, Cole, already like this Rebels team is backs against the wall because, it's already, I still sit here a couple days later just in shock at what we witnessed. You fall to 0-2 in conference play. I think you could argue it's the most disappointing team in college football already. Like, I don't think that would be too bold of a statement. So I think it's a fascinating dynamic to where anytime you're going on the road in the SEC against a South Carolina team that, you better be taking seriously, right? Has played good football, could easily be undefeated. But then you added the fact Ole Miss lost their SEC opener. All the pressure, it feels like, is on the Rebels in this one to bounce back the right way.
There is literally no pressure on South Carolina other than the internal pressure that is put on them to show why they deserve to still be undefeated going into the month of October. The heart of the season for what I like to call optimistic October, where dreams are made or realities come crashing on in. That is how I've always believed it. But Ole Miss, there is a truth and a lie somewhere caught in the middle is the reality of what we saw. Ole Miss was fool's gold, but the numbers backed up why we were so high on them. And many people said, well, just watch when they go play against competition like LSU. Watch when they have to go play against Georgia. You'll see the true version of Ole Miss. And you know what? Maybe you were right. But when you rank number one in passing, number one in scoring, number one in total yards, number one on third down conversions, number one in first downs, number one in run defense, number three in scoring defense, number seven in third down opponents conversions, and you're great inside the red zone. You have an All-American wide receiver, a Heisman caliber quarterback, and a coach that went out in the offseason to build a roster that he says, quote unquote, was made to go up against the tyrants of the SEC. Yeah. You feel like that you have a lot of pressure on your back. You feel like that it has to happen. And the reason it has to happen, Chris, is because if you go back to last season, this has been a 9-month process in the making for 2024. Jackson Dart makes the announcement, I'm coming back for my quote-unquote last dance. And then Jordan Watkins follows and Caden Prieskorn follows. And then you see Quinshon Judkins leave, but you watch as now you bring back Henry Parrish. You still have Ulysses Bentley. Matt Jones is there. And you start winning in the transfer portal. You get big-time recruits. On top of keeping J.J. Pegues and also keeping Jared Ivey, you go bring in a Walter Nolan, number 2 defensive player in the country at one point, the number 1 defensive player in the country in 2022, and the number 2 overall recruit. Princely Manley-Ellen. You go get a linebacker in Chris Paul. You go get better in the secondary with Isaiah Hamilton from Houston and Key Lawrence and Yam Banks from South Alabama. You build up your offensive line. And you know that this is the year because the schedule bodes extremely well in our favor. We know that we can get into the playoff at 10-2 because of the way that we're going to win games. And more importantly, we may be able to actually put together a season where we end up in Atlanta and they can't keep us out because the branding and the logo is going to carry a lot of weight for some teams. It doesn't for us. So that means we have to play a certain brand of football to prove our status as a top 12 team. And they haven't. And they didn't. It took one game. It took one game to suck all the air out of the hyper balloon that we call this 2024 season down in Oxford. And now they're facing literal elimination. They are on life support, and it is a feeding heartbeat at this moment. It is. Because if I can tell you what, South Carolina was the one team that I had circled in the offseason. They may beat Georgia. They may lose to South Carolina, and it wouldn't shock me. I don't think anybody thought Kentucky did. And here's the best part, Chris. You know this as well as I do. Kentucky lost to South Carolina. I mean, they didn't lose. They didn't lose. They got boat raced. They got drugged. They got bamboozled in their own backyard. And they were coming off of a really, really close call with Old Dominion. And now they have a week to be able to regroup after winning once again against a very poorly coached and an overall undervalued and really just lackluster program in Akron. They had multiple opportunities to walk away with the win, and probably for my money, because I still believe this, should have walked away with the win against LSU. And they're hungry. And that is the last team that you want to play hungry right now. And Ole Miss cannot afford a single slip up. So Ole Miss right now is currently at a crossroads in the reality of what is their season. One path is we are going to look as perfect as possible the way that we played against Middle Tennessee State, the way that we played against Wake Forest, the way that we played against Georgia Southern. That will be us the rest of the year. Best of luck to everyone in our way. Or we're going to feel sorry for ourselves and the season's over before we even get to October 10th. That's a harsh reality. And by the way, you still have 2 more games, one of which is in what many people would consider the most toxic, hostile, crazy, unanimously psycho shit universe in all of college football. And they're coming off of a bye. So you need this win. And more importantly, you need to have a statement type win.
And to your point, Cole, again, you look at the schedule, you mentioned LSU and Georgia still away, and not to make each individual week and each individual game about playoff implications, because I know sometimes we can beat that to death and over-talk the playoff, but to your point, you fall to 0-2 in SEC play and have your second loss. I mean, Cole, I was one of the people over the summer that was saying Ole Miss with their schedule might need to go 11-1 to get in the playoffs. So you're already putting yourself, in an not a great situation. You fall to 0-2 in SEC play, to your point, and especially with a team full of transfers. How does that sit? What is the mood in the locker room? Things would hit the fan there in Oxford, to say the least. Speaking of, Cole, just the dynamic of these two teams, what they're coming off of. You mentioned, of course, where we've talked Ole Miss with the Kentucky game. South Carolina coming off the bye week, right? Just beat Akron, then the bye week. The Gamecocks, Cole, fun fact, they are 15-3 coming off of bye weeks since 2009. Now, I say that while also acknowledging South Carolina came off their bye week last year and fell to the Florida Gators at home. So, I mean, it's an imperfect science, just like the transitive property. A team beat B team, so B team will beat C team. It doesn't always work out that way. Just throwing it out there, though. South Carolina historically being good off bye weeks. Cole, I think one of the biggest storylines in this game, obviously, what is the status of Gamecocks quarterback LaNorris Sellers and running back Rocket Sanders? And Cole, just to give you and the folks tuned in some insight, was able to talk to one of my South Carolina guys this morning. Again, it's early in the week. We're recording this on Monday, so things are subject to change. We've got mandated injury reports that will be released. But right now on Monday, the status of these two guys, LaNorris Sellers is expected to be ready to go. Rocket Sanders is a TBD. But he also mentioned to me he would not bet any amount of money on the fact that both of these guys will be playing. And for all the South Carolina folks tuned in, if you've been following along long enough and watching Gamecocks football, you know when it comes to injuries, you never know. I mean, you just never know what's going to happen. So very curious, Cole, to see, does South Carolina have to rely on Robbie Ashford, who looked really good in the Akron game? He's obviously got a skill set. I'm still kind of like, I don't know what I'm exactly going to get out of Robbie Ashford. And then the running back situation, if you go down Rocket Sanders, I mean, listen, you've got depth. Oscar Attaway looked really good in that game against Akron, but I feel like that'd be a big loss too. So the status of these two guys, I think, going to go a long way in South Carolina's chances to pull this upset.
It is, but at the same time, I think that there's something that needs to be said. We truly, at this point, have to start giving more credit to South Carolina. And we're sometimes bad when it comes to not giving the credit to the team that ends up looking phenomenal, and maybe we were underselling at the start of the season. South Carolina is going to show you who I think they can be at the national perspective, which for my money is either a spoiler that is going to ruin multiple college football seasons and take teams out of the postseason conversation, or a team that's going to funnel into that dark horse category and maybe punch their way into a 10-win season. And then you watch the way they play and say, well, we can't keep them out of the postseason. Or if we do, there has to be because of other teams went 11-1, or they're more dominant wins, or they have a better resume. But this is really where we are with South Carolina, because of so far they played, for my money, albeit not a physical game against LSU. And I still think LSU's offensive line is better than what we saw from Ole Miss. Ole Miss was bullied. Ole Miss was bullied up front. And this is a unit that was brought in with a ton of NIL money, with a ton of resources from the collective to be the reason why they would be going to Atlanta. They were the reason they'd be going deep into a college football playoff hunt. They'd be the reason why this would be a new foundation down on the Grove that would be sustainable well past 2024 in a new era of the SEC. And you know who got bullied also? Kentucky's offensive line by South Carolina in that game. And Ole Miss's defensive line, had a couple of good plays. They had a couple of really great designs, whether it be from J.J. Pegues, whether it be from Jared Ivey, whether it be from Princely Uyan Ellen, Walter Nolan, a couple of design blitzes with Chris Paul. So how this offensive line looks playing against that defensive line might give you a better indication on how South Carolina can win this game. For me, it's going to be tempo. You have to play a brand of football that is eerily similar to what we saw by Kentucky. Because Kentucky, people are not going to look at this number, and I'm going to have to remind you, they owned the football for 40 minutes in that game. It was nearly a 40-20 split in time of possession. And they put pressure on Ole Miss to have to take those deep shots down the field. And Ole Miss had one receiver that game actually have success, Trey Harris. And then Caden Prieskorn gets one major catch for 46 yards. And besides that, quiet day from Jordan Watkins, quiet day from Juice Walls, quiet day from the freshman Caden Lee. Like there was so much just silence on that front that if you play that brand of football where you have some good design runs with Oscar Attaway, with Rocket Sanders, if he is healthy, with Juju McDowell, with quarterback keepers, whether it be Robbie Ashford or LaNorris Sellers, and you're picking up those first downs and you're reaching that second level, at this point, all you're asking your offensive line to do is play how Kentucky played last week. And if you do that, your defense is better than Kentucky's. At least for my money, you are. And Kentucky may end up being a top 20 defense in the country. So if Kentucky's a top 20 defense, what does that say about you? Top 15? Top 12? I mean, there are certainly some miscues and definitely some careless penalties that occurred in several games that made things interesting. But for the sake of where you are, Kennard and Stewart are two of the best defensive ends in the country. They certainly are in the SEC. I have been high on Taka Hemingway all offseason. I think that he was one of the biggest under-the-radar players. Debo Williams is phenomenal. Jalen Kilgore is fantastic. Nick Emanwari can easily take an interception to the house the opposite way. And I think that your cornerbacks gained a lot of confidence in that game last week. And if a pair of freshmen in Lexington can do it, why can't you? And so, yes, it's going to be really important to have a guy like LaNorris Sellers on the field because of the speed, the physicality, that frame that is so hard to bring down. Arm tackles will literally be blown up if he goes and runs it. But I feel like that this is going to be a game where it's all about tempo. So the main reason why you need these two out there is because it would be great to win with the Amazio Bennett catching the ball, whether it be a Jacobs, whether it be a Joshua Simon, whether it be even a Michael Smith or a Jared Brown or whoever it is. You'd be okay with that, but you're going to have to run the football. And two is better than one. And right now, the best two is Rocket Sanders and LaNorris Sellers being in your backfield to give you that finesse and that physical brand where you can also throw in Juju McDowell and Oscar Attaway.
Yeah, and it goes without saying, Cole, in a game like this, you need your stars to shine because even with Ole Miss's loss to Kentucky, I think we all still think they're a very capable football team, very talented football team, no doubt. You're going to need those guys to emerge. You mentioned the offensive lines, Cole. I do think it's interesting. Those both offensive lines, how they fare. Ole Miss struggled. I mean, they struggled mightily. They went 1 for 10 on third down against Kentucky. A lot of the offensive line struggles played in that. Ole Miss's defensive line, 5 sacks against Kentucky. So they've got some bodies up there. And South Carolina they've been better on the offensive line, Cole, for sure, than they were last year. I mean, that goes without saying. But, how do they hold up? I think the battle of both of these offensive lines, and both have defensive fronts that are athletic and capable, and obviously Kennard and Stewart off the edge. For South Carolina, you mentioned Hemingway and Huntley as well in the interior, Nick Sanders, T.J. Barrett. The list goes on and on of guys they've got. So, I think which offensive line holds up better. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but I do think that's going to be a fun cat and mouse game between the two lines of scrimmage because, again,
Chris,
you got to go. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off, but like when you say 5 sacks in that game, how many also missed tackles behind the line of scrimmage for Ole Miss? That's
no doubt.
And you may have the same type of running back and even a more physical quarterback in LaNorris Sellers if he's back there. That's my concern. 5 sacks is one thing, but 5 missed tackles that went for substantial gains in the open field is another.
Yeah. And again, South Carolina's defensive line, I mean, when you have edge rushers like they do, it becomes kind of the great equalizer. Like, you can blow things up. It's why they're so highly valued, getting edge rushers, getting guys like Dylan Stewart on campus. So I'm very curious. I mean, again, Ole Miss's game plan offensively was not great against Kentucky. They were using a lot of Jackson Dart quarterback draw. The play calling was suspect. It's a big game for Ole Miss, rebounding on all fronts, even for Lane Kiffin. And I think with the play calling side of things and, what they have in regards to strategy to combat, like you mentioned, a really good South Carolina defense at this point. Like, I think you got to put a lot of respect on what the Gamecocks have done defensively. Now, the secondary will be tested. The back end of the defense will be tested. And that leads me to this, Cole, because we have to talk about this. This is the Juice Wells game.
Yeah.
Bottom line. This is the Juice Wells game. This is, you mentioned, like, Williams-Brice Stadium, again, we were there a couple weeks ago. Williams-Brice Stadium against LSU was a madhouse. I mean, I mentioned it's the best noon kickoff environment I've ever experienced. I mean, we already know it's one of the most underrated venues in college football. It's one of the best venues. I don't know why it's underrated. It's one of the best, period. Especially when things are going well and the Gamecocks are rolling. I mean, that place is a zoo.
It's stupid. That's underrated.
It was an insane asylum against LSU. Cole, with that being said, as badly as South Carolina people and South Carolina fans wanted to win that game, Cole, I would have told you coming in this season that outside of Clemson, because that's a gimme, this game against Ole Miss was the game that South Carolina fans want more than any. So if the LSU atmosphere was that, this atmosphere against Ole Miss, it is going to be, and I say what I'm about to say not as an insult, but just being transparent. I think it's going to be one of the nastiest atmospheres you see this season. Like, Cole, there is a lot of hatred for Juice Wells. I mean, there is a lot. This is not your friendly, like, oh, we don't like you, but like, this is next level disdain and vitriol for this man because of the way things went down. Did he sit out? Did he not? Did he take the money and run? It was a really, really nasty breakup, Cole. So this environment already would have been next level. It is going to be, again, it's one of the most underrated bad blood games of the season because of the Juice Wells storyline. Now, what will his stat line be? Are they going to make it a point to get in the football because he was a Gamecock last year? I don't know that that's really the case, Cole, but I mean, you're probably going to hear some chants. You're going to see some signs. It is going to be a madhouse. And any time Juice Wells touches the football, that stadium, I'd imagine, is going to erupt in boos. So, I mean, anytime you've got a dynamic like that where it's Cole, it's Juice Wells against 80,000 on Saturday. And I know the game is more than him. It's way more than him. He didn't even have a catch last week against Kentucky. But like that dynamic is going to be, and I will throw this out there, and South Carolina folks might be mad at me for it. You ask any South Carolina fan, Cole, the Gamecocks have this really bad habit of when they play former players in any sport. It happened against Jermaine Couisnard in basketball for Oregon. It's happened in baseball before. I mean, it seems like this happens a lot where they play former players, and those guys have like some of their best games against them. So, yeah. I mean, winning this game is priority number one. Shutting down Juice Wells is priority. If that's 1A, that's 1B. I mean, like it is going to be such a fascinating environment. I cannot wait to sit back and watch it unfold because, again, bad blood throughout the air in Columbia, and it all centers around Juice Wells.
Chris, they still have 2 marquee games left on the schedule out in Williams-Brice Stadium, which, again, I'm going to make this abundantly clear. And shame on the college football society that does not understand this. That is one of the most beautiful, toxically amazing, fantastic fan bases in the sport. And when we say vitriol and disgust, that is a compliment. In fact, that is the highest regard of a compliment in the world of college football. They still have games against Texas A&M and Missouri, which both could be top 15 matchups. They will be docile compared to this game. This will be the most vitriol, volatile, disgusting atmosphere you have ever seen in a 2024 season simply because number 3 is coming in. And it's going to be a moment where he takes the field. And it is like, if you've seen the movie 300, well, let me paint you a picture. Everyone is dead, but Leonidas is standing there watching as the arrows are about ready to protrude him and make his life become a living hell and cease to exist. And that will be Williams-Brice Stadium, the arrows flying on into number 3. And it feels like at this point, it's kind of after the first time you see an ex in a really bad breakup, somebody walks away a winner. Now, is it the person that met the right girl and now is dating a supermodel and they're getting back on track with their finances and they feel really confident about where they are in terms of buying a house and they're making the right necessary investments? Or is it the guy that ends up getting a supermodel job and ends up getting to become a millionaire and travel across the world? And that's Juice Wells. And somebody gets to be right at the end of the day because that's what this game is. You didn't think you could win at a place like South Carolina. You thought that Ole Miss was a place that would get you to your next level. You thought that Ole Miss offered you the best opportunity to better your career. And then you go for 3 for 36 and you don't find the end zone, and Ole Miss ends up losing the game by a 3-point spread, and they all start to run the field because they will charge the field beating against an Ole Miss team, knowing that this is an opponent that they want to take down. And Juice Wall's the only person left to blame is himself. And there's always this hindsight feeling of, what if I would have stayed here? What would I have been? Could I have been the next Xavier Legette? Could I have been the next Deebo Samuel? Could I have been one of the household figures that becomes a legend in Cola? Could I have been that guy? But on the same token, as you mentioned, and as we know this, revenge is a dish best served with 6. And he could be finding his way into the end zone for 6 points on the regular. And Trey Harris, who currently, if you haven't looked up the numbers this morning, I implore you to see the separation between Ryan Williams, who is number 2 in the SEC in receiving yards, and Trey Harris. He may go for 1 catch and 13 yards because this is just the Juice Wall's awakening. And that's a reality that you have to face too. I'm going to be completely transparent, Chris. South Carolina fans, I think, will be very happy if they go 9-3 this year. I think that they will be out of their minds if they go 10-2. I think that if they make the college football playoff, this will be a year that goes down as one to remember for all ages in the history of South Carolina sports. And because of the situation that's going on out in the Western Carolinas and East Tennessee, and by the way, all of us here at SEC Unfiltered, if you are a Gamecock fan, if you're a fan of just college football in general, we send our condolences. Please let us know if there's any way that we can help out in rebuilding what is a beautiful mark of this great country. But for me, when we talk about this, South Carolina fans will sleep well at night, losing to Ole Miss on a game-winning field goal, which at this point kind of feels like, oh my God, that's not going to happen. But still, they would feel good sleeping well at night if Juice Walls doesn't do a damn thing. I honestly believe that they would be more content losing to a top 15 squad in Ole Miss if Juice Walls is targeted 6 times, 0 catches, 0 yards.
Yeah, if he finds the end zone, it is going to be very interesting because, again, I think there's bad blood on both sides, to your point. Cole, let's lock in some predictions for this one.
Can you go first? I need to.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm ready to go. You know, Cole, this is a game, admittedly, as we lock in predictions here. South Carolina, Ole Miss, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time kickoff on ESPN. All eyes going to be on Williams-Brice Stadium. It is going to be an electric atmosphere. That's my first prediction. That's a given. If you thought LSU was fun, that place is going to be rocking in Columbia. This is a game, admittedly, Cole. I was ready before the season to pick Ole Miss by double digits. I was. I'll admit that. I did not think this was a game I had much worry for the Ole Miss Rebels. I was a believer in Ole Miss. Not saying I'm not still, but I was a believer in Ole Miss to a point where I thought they could go 11-1, win an SEC championship, maybe even compete for a national championship. All their goals are still in front of them. But Ole Miss was exposed last week. Let's call it for what it is. They finally had an opportunity to play someone up to their level, pick on somebody their own size, and they were the ones getting picked on, right? And against the Kentucky team that I think is a lot better than we probably want to give credit for, right? They had one really bad showing against South Carolina, and you give South Carolina credit. But Kentucky's probably a little bit better than I think people realized after that game. Went toe-to-toe with Georgia, just beat Ole Miss. That being said, you look at this game, Cole. I do think the statuses of LaNorris Sellers and Rocket Sanders matter, although I'll say this. The information I've received over the last week or so, especially when I went down to Auburn, you might be able to connect the dots there of why I'm saying this. They like Robbie Ashford a little bit more than you would think.
Yeah.
To a point to where I think they would have been comfortable, believe it or not, starting Robbie Ashford to start the season. Because if you look at him and Sellers, they're very similar with their skill sets, right? It's just, and one guy is more of a veteran. LaNorris Sellers is a younger player. But I think they were really comfortable with Ashford and his skill set, what he brings to the table. But coming over from Auburn, there were things to learn, grasping the offense. And obviously, I think LaNorris Sellers had been kind of like anointed the guy. But I think they feel comfortable with him. Now, if Rocket Sanders can't go, I think that's significant. Because to your point, you're going to need the run game. Like, let's not get it twisted. I don't think South Carolina is they didn't become an offensive juggernaut throwing the football over the bye week. That being said, Cole, again, this game, I think South Carolina's defensive front can cause some problems for Ole Miss. I really do. How they respond in that fast of the game, I think, is going to be fascinating because, again, Kentucky dominated them in the trenches. Big game for Lane Kiffin. Like, can he get back in his bag and dial some things up? I think they're going to have to take some vertical shots in the passing game. I do think a guy like Juice Wells is going to need to be featured. I think, obviously, you mentioned Trey Harris. Not enough people are talking about what he's doing right now. I mean, it's crazy when you look at his stat line. But again, Ole Miss has got a lot to prove here to me, Cole, because they've played nobody, and they won the way they should have, but they finally play somebody on their level, and they got punked. I mean, they flat out got punked on their home field by Kentucky. For South Carolina, you feel like you got jobbed against LSU. You feel like you should be 4-0. You feel like this team absolutely deserves to be undefeated. Cole, this is your time to prove that. You want to prove that LSU game was BS and we really should have won that game. We should be undefeated. This is who we really are. You go out and at minimum take Ole Miss down to the wire. Again, they've been very good coming off the bye week. I expect South Carolina, you've had 2 weeks to get ready. I think they'll have a great plan. I think this is going to be a back-and-forth ball game. I think for South Carolina, you need to be able to run the football, establish the run. Quarterback run going to be big in this game. Getting your quarterback, whoever it is, Sellers or Asher, outside of the pocket. Being able to pop some things off in the passing game, right? You got to keep them honest with the run. You're going to have to throw the ball. Can you throw it consistently enough will be the big question. I think, Cole, similar to the LSU game, you're going to need your defense to make some big plays, and you might need a special teams turnover as well, which I think very well can happen because, again, it's going to be an insane environment. The crowd is going to, I think, really going to feed into what South Carolina is able to do on Saturday night. I'm a believer in Ole Miss, Cole. I'm a believer in Ole Miss. I still am. One game is not going to throw me off of that. That being said, I like South Carolina a lot in this spot. I'd like them a lot more if Ole Miss would have beaten Kentucky. I don't think they're going to lose back-to-back games. Backs against the wall. Ole Miss cannot, Cole Thompson, lose this football game. That said, I think South Carolina covers. I think this is a really, really close game. I don't think it's going to be the Ole Miss bounce back winning by 3 touchdowns. I just don't see it in Williams-Brice Stadium. If Ole Miss can stop the run, maybe that's how things could get sideways. But I just haven't seen enough from this Ole Miss team to think they're going to pull away. I like Ole Miss to win. I've got the Rebels taking this one. Ole Miss 30, South Carolina 24. But I think it's a fourth quarter game down to the wire, anybody's ball game. But I think it's Ole Miss making that final big play to get the win. And again, I think a win they have to have. So again, Cole, lock me in. Give me Ole Miss 30, Gamecocks 24.
I don't want to pick. I don't want to pick. I don't want to do this because of the people of Cola have been so sweet to me. And more importantly, my Dartnado hype for Heisman has dwindled drastically. And also, I think that right now, this is a statement for both teams, and it's one that will carry a lot of weight going into the final 7 weeks of the regular season. But for Ole Miss, this is the moment where you have to realize, what do you want to be as a program? Because the thing that people aren't understanding is that Ole Miss still can go 11-1. They still can beat Georgia. They still can go into Death Valley. They still can go to Atlanta. They still can go to the college football playoff. Everything that they saw in terms of what they liked in the transfer portal and on recruiting could eventually hit. And sometimes, because of you have all these appetizers, you fill up before the first course comes in, and then you take half at home in a doggy bag, and you say, okay, well, I'll eat it later, and then you never do. And that's kind of what you saw yesterday. That's what you saw on Saturday. Was they filled up on appetizers. We overhyped them in terms of what the stat line was. They boasted up their ego, and then they got humbled a little bit by a really good Kentucky defense and a guy who was finally willing to drop his nutsack and say, hey, let's go deep. Let's do it. That's what happened. And Kentucky fans are going to feel a little bit different about this because they could be sitting at 4-1 easily if they just go for it on 4th and 8. But they also feel like a team that now kind of gets to play that spoiler in the SEC. And for Ole Miss, you aren't allowed to have a moment. And the worst part is, Chris, is that Ole Miss for years has been just known as this kind of stepping stone program. This program where you reach a certain level and you call that okay. You call that fine. This is who we are, and we've accepted our fate. We've accepted our reality. This isn't one of those years. And it can't be one of those years. And it can't be for anyone on the Grove. It can't be for anyone that listens to that Landshark defense like it's a sacred Bible. It can't be for anyone that invested money into the NIL collective, because of you don't get this opportunity like you do at LSU, like you do at Alabama, like you do at Texas, where we'll get them next year and we'll be in the play. You don't have that. It's not guaranteed in Oxford, and it never will be. And this was the year for you to get it guaranteed. And for South Carolina, this is a moment where Shane Beamer will always have his team ready. That's a top 5 coach I will run through a wall for. That is somebody who I truly believe is just built in this authentic brand of personable and truly overall emphatic love for the game of college football and wants players who fit that same mold. So I'm not worried about atmosphere. And I can promise you, when we look back in November, what this game is, what this game was, how the results paid massive ripple effects towards the college football playoff, we're also going to throw this in as the most underrated game in college football for 2024. Not in the SEC, in college football for 2024. You can book it, write it in permanent ink, go get it tattooed on your body. Let me see. Cole Thompson said this, and I will gladly sign it for you to go ahead and continue the ink pattern. That's how much I believe this is going to be the most underrated game. And Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard are going to have field days going up against this offensive line. The secondary is going to make plays. But I have Ole Miss in the playoff. And I have Dartnado stock in winning the Heisman. And I need to see that Heisman moment. If Ole Miss loses this game, I will not pick them the rest of the year. I will pick them in every single game from here on out. And I will pick South Carolina in every game moving forward. And I have South Carolina going 8-4 this year at this point. Maybe even 9-3 is on the horizon. I'm going against my gut. I'm going against my judgment. My gut says that Ole Miss will be able to lose this somehow. My brain says it can't happen in back-to-back weeks. And Lane Kiffin last week said the thing that actually kind of stabilized this, I'm not going to treat this like it is a major loss, because I don't treat any win like it's a major win. And I think that that's the words that you need to hear from a mature coach that understands the environment. 28-21 final score, Ole Miss. I'm taking the points. South Carolina gives them the best fight. And Juice Wells has 2 touchdowns. And that's going to be the game. I'm sorry.
And that would be the most predictable South Carolina stat line of all time. I didn't mention whether it was Juice Wells on the final drive that gets that big touchdown, but it will not shock me. I would expect Juice Wells to have a big game. It's because that's just what South Carolina has done against former players. So
it will be Juice Wells.
Yeah,
he will get the game-winning touchdown.
And again, before we close, Cole, again, like I mentioned, I would feel better about South Carolina winning this game had Ole Miss beat Kentucky 20-17. But I just think the sense of urgency, losing that Kentucky game and now understanding, I mean, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either Ole Miss is going to band together and lock in and play their best football, or they're going to quit. And I just don't think they're going to quit at this point. Like, I just don't see that. So it's going to be a hell of a game. I mean, it's going to come down to the wire. It's going to be more than I thought it was going to be over the summer, Cole. But I do think Ole Miss finds a way to get it done.
Chris, I would pick South Carolina if Ole Miss won last week. I would 100% pick South Carolina. And that I know is going to be just like at the very end in the comment section, it's going to be, it's a slap in the face to us, Cole. Go screw yourself. I get it. I do. But I'll tell you what, South Carolina, I have made this clear all offseason. I've made this clear every single time I do these preview videos. And I asked to be on this preview video because I think South Carolina fans have come to understand I truly mean when I say you are the biggest wild card in college football this year. You can tell me that you win a game against a top 10 opponent by double digits, and I can believe it. You can tell me that you lose to Vanderbilt by 16 points, and I can believe it. You're all over the place. And I think that that's what we're going to see on Saturday is, once again, another game that goes down to the wire, but not one that's decided by the Zebras, not one that is decided by bonehead plays, one that is decided by a team that wakes up and realizes we want to be a national championship brand. Time to start fucking acting like it.
So, guys, let us know. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree? Who you taking with the Gamecocks and Rebels square off on Saturday at Williams-Brice Stadium? Guys, that's going to do all for us. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Again, make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us across all social media platforms, as well as our website, SECUnfiltered.com. GameTime.com. For Cole Thompson, I'm Chris Phillips. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in, and we'll catch you on the other side.